Hi, I'm Joel Sharpton, one half of the Articulate Coven Podcast, and this is 5 things you might have missed in episode 5 of Interview with the Vampire. So, Rashid has been an interesting presence all season, and now feeds Louis and walks away while maintaining a conversation with Daniel? Meanwhile, the one other person we've watched Louis feed from in the modern day passed out within seconds. Maybe it's nothing, maybe it's something, but we are supposed to notice this. We are supposed to question this. It's why Daniel specifically wonders about Rashid's weight. Here's a French bonus. Comme j'ai dit means, as I said. And yes, that's now a sassy French way to say I told you so that you can keep in your back pocket. Bodies in the bayou. I am no medical expert, but I do live in Louisiana. And I cannot imagine that many whole bodies would remain intact in the bayous surrounding New Orleans. I worked just outside of Chalmette for a few years, and there are absolutely alligators there, and plenty of other things that would love to help dispose of a body or two. It is probably true that a big storm would expose some remains. Enough to cause a scandal, maybe even. But bodies intact enough to know that a souvenir was taken from each one? I don't think so. Not down here. Not in the water. Let's talk about vampire powers. While Anne's stories are all more focused on the humanity of these monstrous characters she's created and their relationships than they are the specific power levels between any two vampires in question, Anne does pretty clearly lay out what those powers are and how they can be achieved. The main thing to know is that all vampiric power increases with age, and can be jump-started to one of those new levels by an influx of ancient vampiric blood. So, Lestat is very strong in this series because Magnus was very old and very strong when he created Lestat. And maybe for some other reasons? Anne lays out the following as gifts that the vampiric blood can bestow. The cloud gift, or flying. The fire gift, which allows vampires to ignite a candle or a stack of wood, and if they're old enough, even other vampires or mortals. The mind gift, which allows vampires to read humans' thoughts and each other's thoughts, and the spell gift, which allows them to bewitch or control a human subject, and even weaker vampires. In the books, this power specifically tends to be not as strong as we've seen. For instance, Lestat running an entire townhouse full of soldiers out at one time, that would be a stretch for all but the most ancient of vampires. There is one other gift mentioned in the novels, but it doesn't come up until the very end of the series, the Prince Lestat trilogy, and I know a lot of people haven't gotten there yet, so I'm not touching it in this video. Let's talk about Bruce the Vampire. Bruce, or Killer as he's called here and in the novels, is an Anne Rice creation. I think you'll find almost every major character in this series is. They didn't invent very many people at all. Killer is first introduced in the Queen of the Damned novel. Killer is the founder and leader of the 20th century motorcycle coven Fang Gang. He appears in The Queen of the Damned in 1988 and then again much later in the Prince Lestat trilogy. His origin in the novel is a bit different as well. In 1925, a vampire who no longer desires to suffer the agonizing isolation of an immortal life wanders into a backwater Texas town, turns a 13-year-old boy into the vampire Killer. Killer spends the next 60 years wandering throughout the United States, learning to be a vampire. He learns how to ride a motorcycle and forms the motorcycle club by turning several others into vampires, calling his crew the Fang Gang. You might notice that nowhere there did I mention that Killer meets Claudia. That's because he never does in the novels. In the novels, Claudia is turned in 1794, and she never meets Killer at all. This storyline where Killer assaults Claudia is a complete contrivance for the show, and it's one that I'm still not sure I'm for. Claudia is never assaulted in this way in the novels. And to many people, including me, this change felt like exploitation of the character, as well as the real-life situations that this mimics. Those situations being used to toughen up a character is sour for a lot of people. When you've seen the whole story that this crew is telling, I would encourage you to take your own stance on whether this storyline was worth it or not. Speaking of changes from the novels, let's talk about our ending domestic violence scene. This just doesn't happen in the novels. And as much or more than the race-swapped casting or the time period shift of the TV series, this scene was controversial for book fans like me. You do have to remember that Lestat is the main character in almost every book for the rest of the series. He's the protagonist that most people cheer, if you do that at all in a series like this one. So when we see him doing something that he definitely did not do in Anne Rice's works, we rush to find an excuse or at least some sort of reason, justification for this appearance in the show. No spoilers, but there may be more context or color added for these scenes and Lestat's actions for those of you who continue on to see Season 2. But for those like me on my first watch that want to wave a magic wand and say, this didn't happen, it did. In the TV show world, it did. And it's a big reason why what's about to happen to Lestat is about to happen. That's your 5. Here's your lagniappe fact. Lagniappe means, in Cajun French, a little something extra. The song over the credits for this episode. And unique for this episode in the show so far, as before we've always got Daniel Hart's orchestration. The song is called Home is Where You're Happy. And while it might be an ironic enough title to play for this episode all on its own, given the very upsetting finale of this episode, it's also a reference to the moment earlier when Daniel says, speaking of Claudia, Charles Manson wrote some great songs. It's true. He did. And this is one of them. Written and recorded by Manson in 1970. Manson's most famous song is probably Never Learn Not to Love from 1969, recorded by the Beach Boys. Yes, those Beach Boys. The Beach Boys knew and worked with Manson, as did many other music industry notables like Neil Young. It is a weird world, y'all. All right. That's the things you missed in episode 5. I'll be back next week with episode 6. Or if you're watching these on YouTube, you can get episode 6 right now on our Patreon. Check the links below for all the details. And thanks to everyone who is supporting our channel and videos just like this one.